Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me here today. Really glad to have you all here. So, we are what feels like 5 years into the pandemic, and it's just been a nightmare. And I know it's especially been a nightmare for essential workers, whether that's those who are working at Instacart or driving for Uber, or those who are working in warehouses like Amazon's warehouse, like Christian, where you worked, and or regular grocery store workers. It's just been a lot. And I know that toward the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of conversation around just, the importance of getting these essential workers personal protective equipment. And so I'm curious, like, is that what's the current state of essential workers right now? And I guess Vanessa, I'll kind of pass to you, just kind of comparing how it was then versus how it is now.
Sure. I think we have a whole hell of a lot less reasons to be unprotected at this point, right? Which is sad because unfortunately, I think a lot of our employers are still failing to provide any kind of meaningful protection to us. I definitely don't feel like I can go into a store and do my job safely or feel like I'm empowered in my workplace at this point in the pandemic. There's a little bit, I think, of optimism around the idea of like vaccines and like rates dropping, but we also have entire states that are like lifting mask mandates and doing wild stuff. In my area, we just opened indoor dining again, and my sister's a restaurant worker, and I really fear for her safety. She hasn't been able to get the vaccine. So, I think in a lot of ways, we aren't significantly better off than we were at the beginning. And I think that, we have less excuses for it at this point from our employers.
Yeah, and Christian, I mean, you've been very outspoken about working at the Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, and you were ultimately fired for speaking out about your experiences there. And I'm curious. I mean, I would imagine that you're still in touch with some workers there. Like, does it sound like things have improved at all, or does it kind of just seem like same
No,
old? Like,
no, absolutely not. Coming up on my 1 year anniversary since I protested last year in March, workers still at that same facility are having the same issues. There's still workers in there, still working in fear. Workers still feel like the company can be doing a lot more. What we were advocating for in the beginning was just to have the building closed down and professionally cleaned. They still refuse to do that. Instead they want to implement all these safety things that they feel are protecting workers. But we all know at these Amazon facilities with thousands of workers that report to work there every day, it's impossible to do social distancing there and operate under the scrutiny and under the rates that they want for productivity. So these employees still need to be held accountable. And that's exactly why I continue to advocate and speak up, because these issues still exist.
yeah, and obviously, I mean, there's a massive union drive happening at one of the warehouses in Bessemer, Alabama. How involved are you with that organizing?
Very involved. I just came back from there last week. I drove 16 hours down there. I spent a number of days, talked to several workers, connected with all the union leaders. I continue to text them daily, text workers, support anything online. We just had a rally yesterday, 2 days ago, actually, in New York City. So we're on supportamazonworkers.org. We have a whole plan for the rest of the remaining of the month as the ballots still go out to these workers. So I'm very involved every single day.
Yeah, and what are workers asking for right now? Like, why, based on your understanding, like, what is the driving force that's making them want to unionize, and what are they hoping to get from that?
Well, the perfect timing. The building opened up when coronavirus started. When New York City became the epicenter, that's when Bessemer facility opened up. So the union got a head start on talking to workers. So that's a gem for anybody or any union that plans on trying to unionize a building. If you have a facility in your community that's about to open up, grand opening, That's the best time to connect with the workers. That's what happened last year. And as a result, the workers they've seen what happened to workers that were unprotected, and they don't want that. They want better for themselves, and they rightfully deserve that, especially in Alabama, a right-to-work state, state with no state minimum, obviously a red state. So there's a lot of intangibles against them, but these workers now see the window of opportunity for change systemically, and I think that we have this time to do that. So I think they're going to come through.
Nice. Yeah, and Jessica, I know that Kosh recently came out with this national agenda focused on labor and workers' rights, and within that there were some policy recommendations. Would you be able to just kind of like break down what some of those key recommendations were moving forward?
Sure, happy to. And let me just explain a little bit of who we are, just so folks get a sense of where this agenda is rooted at. So we're a network of about 23 community-based workplace safety and health coalitions advocating and providing training for safer workplaces. We work with a variety of worker advocates, worker leaders such as Chris, Vanessa, on the ground, supporting campaigns and really looking for convergence in areas of living wages, health and safety, really anything that applies to healthier and safer workplaces. One thing to note, Megan, is that what we now recognize as essential workers, National Kosh has always recognized and worked with what have been essential workers even pre-COVID time, in terms of these are the workers, gig workers, workers in some of the most low-wage, high-hazard industries, really are the essential working force that help our economy. And really the pandemic itself has amplified the issues that we have known already in terms of job insecurity, poor wages, lack of paid sick leave, lack of safe jobs, and really holding employers having no system in place. And OSHA, which is the government agency essentially tasked with protecting worker health and safety, completely MIA during this pandemic. So after hearing from workers on the ground, really sort of talking to people and understanding the crucial need for workers to have a voice and really approach this with this worker-centered approach, National Kosh released a national agenda on worker health and safety, and it highlights essentially 8 points. We want stronger safety laws, tougher enforcement, including a mandatory emergency standard to prevent the spread of the infectious disease. And again, this is federally. So if there is an ETS or an emergency standard passed, it applies all over and impacts all kinds of workers. Stronger protections against retaliation. We know for workers who are trying to organize, retaliation is the first concern for workers. I'm sure Chris and Vanessa can speak to this. Employers will funnel resources to try to, and scare tactics to scare workers from organizing, demanding safer workplaces, job security, and so forth. It also includes workers are included in all policy decisions. We believe strongly that workers, more than anyone, understand the job, know the solutions and controls to health and safety issues, and also equity and inclusion to end the misclassification and better protections for temp worker, gig workers, paid sick and family leave for workers, also worker-centered health protocols, including help for high-risk workers in getting access to vaccines. And we want to confront the workplace effects of climate change. Finally, also prevent chemical catastrophes and harmful exposures. So I do invite the audience here to visit nationalkosh.org for full access to the agenda. With that said, this is not working in isolation. It works in collaboration with laws we're hoping that will pass, such as the PRO Act, allowing workers to gain bargaining power when organizing, essentially giving them the ability to negotiate with the employer, get access to benefits, again, such as some job security, paid sick leave, workers' comp, and so forth. We know that Prop 22, for instance, was a slap in the face for California workers and setting the tone nationwide in terms of protections for gig workers.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely just hit on a lot of things that I'm wanting to dive deeper into, and I guess maybe we can start with let's start with like the PRO Act, and yeah, just like you said, I mean, so right now I believe it's in the Senate, and I've read some articles saying like in order for this to really kind of come through, it needs the support of President Biden, I'll toss this to you, Vanessa, because I remember when we chatted last year, you mentioned that you were kind of like cautiously optimistic about the Biden administration, but kind of ultimately like it's not like Trump was the reason why the U.S. just kind of went to hell, but there were already these systems in places that kind of supported that. And so I'm curious, where do you currently stand on Biden's support of workers, and I guess your hope that he can maybe get the PRO Act through?
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to hold him, accountable to his promise that he made to workers, to ensure that, especially as gig workers, misclassified workforce, that we would be properly classified under his administration. Again, I think, unfortunately, a lot of my optimism is still cautious at this point, in the sense that, I had a lot of optimism that, for example, Gavin Newsom in California could do the right thing, and has let us down on multiple instances, in regards to Prop 22. And refusing to take a public stance about that. I think that, unfortunately, just the systemic powers that be are not worker friendly, regardless of whether or not they're Democrats or Republicans, right? Mm-hmm. Like, maintaining the status quo is about keeping the oligarchs and big tech and people with money and power afloat, and really it's always at the expense of us, right? Like, it's always at the expense of the people that do the actual labor. So I mean, I think that, do I want to believe that the president is going to come through for us? Of course I do. Do I place all of my eggs in that basket? No, but am I still holding him accountable to his public commitments, as well as the vice president's public commitments to support proper classification and the PRO Act? Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just still kind of on the topic of Biden, and this one's for you, Chris. But so I guess earlier this week or last week, Biden kind of came out in support of Amazon warehouse workers unionizing in Bessemer. Do you see that as a positive sign? Like, do you believe his words and feel like that's something he's really wanting to push forward?
Yeah, I'm gonna say the same thing as Vanessa. I would love to hope that he is a man of his word. He's a pro-union guy. He ran his campaign off of that, saying he's a union guy and unions need to be stronger, and he support unions all the way. It was powerful to see the president, the man, the highest plateau in the country, support the union. He said Alabama. I'll give him that. He didn't mention Amazon for whatever reason. He claimed that he can't say the company's name, which I just think that's kind of BS, but it is what it is. I still want to give him credit for acknowledging the fact that the union is going on, and that I guess he tried to put his foot down, saying that there shouldn't be no union busting. So I definitely give him kudos for that. It hasn't been done in several decades from a president, a commander-in-chief, acknowledging the fact that a union drive is going on in the country, and we all need to support that. So I was happy to see that. But once again, like Vanessa said, I don't put all my eggs in that basket either. I just want to hold him accountable, make sure that we see this all the way through to the end. Even if Alabama is not successful, if we were to try again in other locations, other parts of the country, that we have the support of the highest power in the country. That is the most powerful thing that will resonate with workers. So it's good to see that it's happening now.
Yeah, for sure. And and we've kind of talked about Prop 22 in this conversation, but I want to kind of give it a little bit more airtime. So Yeah, I mean, for those who are unfamiliar, yeah, Prop 22, California labor law that went into effect. It was very heavily backed by Uber, Lyft, Instacart, the works. They put in like over $200 million into it. So yeah, that went into effect earlier this year in California, which essentially, yeah, made gig workers independent contractors. And I guess what we've seen now is that there was this good Bloomberg article about how there's kind of like this trickle effect of Prop 22 and its impact on people's jobs in other industries. And yeah, I'll toss this to you, Jessica. Like, I'm curious about what you're seeing from some of the workers who are affiliated with Kosh and kind of what they're seeing and how you're maybe trying to combat that.
Right. So one of the key pieces that we do through our network is education. That has been one of the key, I guess you could say, just key arms for us to mobilize and bring worker power. And worker power is truly what we sort of center in our approach to build some knowledge for workers and so forth. I do want to share something that's very key. As you already mentioned, these huge corporations, billionaires, basically hijacked the ballot measure system in California by spending millions to mislead voters, right? And what happens with that is that there was a study that showed about 40% of California residents who voted thought they were supporting workers. Mm-hmm. Again, when you have bags that are stamped with yes on 22 and people think you're supporting workers for better access to rights, because people want to help the working class, the majority is the working class. There is some misinformation. Prop 22 passes, and unfortunately you have workers who have possibly died. We have a California rideshare driver who died from COVID-19 last month. His independent classifications means his family will receive no workers' compensation. That is a huge impact to workers and the reality of how it impacts day-to-day life for workers and in the midst of a pandemic. So I share that because Prop 22 sets the tone again for what could happen nationally. We know like the Uber CEO has said that they will do and put all the resources they need to make sure there's no laws like this across the country. And again, one of the things to also note about Prop 22, it reverses the momentum activists had in 2019 when they passed California AB 5, which recognized gig workers as full employees, entitling them to labor rights like unemployment insurance, paid sick leave, overtime, and a path to unionizing. So with that impact, again, what do we expect for the PRO Act? I agree. I share sentiments with Vanessa and Chris that we are cautious about what the Biden administration can do to support us, but ultimately is us, the people, workers who have the decision-making power and pushing our political representatives into doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this actually this question comes in from the audience, from Stephanie Holguin. Yeah, they're wondering your thoughts on the Biden administration hiring Seth Harris. And his work was cited by the tech industry just to support California's Prop 22.
Is there a particular recipient for the question, or just any of us jump in?
Yeah, just any of you jump in. Yeah.
I think one of the reasons why I don't have a ton of enthusiasm about a Biden administration is largely because a lot of these exact same goons came up under Obama, right? Like, that's why this is not isolated, and this is not a failure of Trump per se, right? Like, this is a failure of our entire structure of economy, right? And we have really allowed tech to run rampant under this pretense that somehow it's innovative, and especially within the gig economy, I mean, it's the opposite of innovative, right? Like, it's feudalism on your phone, right? It's 1-800 dial-a-serve. So it's like they're not doing anything new that justifies creating an entirely different classification of labor than existed before. which is what Prop 22 did, right? It literally created this category of marketplace contractor that retains neither the protections of an independent contractor nor an employee, and allowing, you know, companies to write their own laws in this way is a systemic failure. Like, this is something that, you know, we need to be doing things about at the national level. Part of why we need the PRO Act, right, is because these things shouldn't be at the mercy of who happens to be, you know, held to a position. These are things that should be codified and enshrined really in law, and things that should be consistent and stable protections that people can rely on and count on. So I'll let somebody else also throw their 2 cents in there. But yeah, unfortunately, it's just, you know, story after story of appointee after appointee that is something that is disappointing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is Seth Harris, that's Kamala Harris' brother-in-law, right? I believe he came from Amazon, so that might have been directed, excuse me, could have been directed towards me. But I think that yeah, the lobbyist that's coming into the Biden administration obviously is going to play a huge factor into, you know, what happens to the working class in this country. And once again, if we don't hold them accountable, like Jessica is saying, you know, we have to, all the people have to come together and hold our elected officials accountable. And whoever's in this administration, whoever's a part of the cabinets, we have to pay close attention to them. Make sure that, once again, that we have a voice in everything that's being passed into law and legislative in these bills, the PRO Act. We have to be in tune. We can't wait 4 years to show up and vote for the next president and expect a real systemic change. So we have to start at the local level. We have to start at the city level. And we absolutely have to continue organizing. So I don't agree with having Seth Harris. Ultimately, that's to answer that question specifically. Obviously, he used to, I believe this is the same guy that came from Amazon. He came from the executive board or VP at one point. So he's obviously going in there to lobby for them, lobby for big techs. And he's not the only one in there. So we once again, we just got to make sure that Biden holds true to his campaign promises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with Chris. I think he said it loud and clear. One of the things also that's important for us to dive into in relation to this effort and sort of these laws and holding our political representatives accountable is to also recognize the alignment there is with these other national movements in terms of what the impact has been, for instance, of COVID, the gig economy, in particular to communities of color, Black, Brown, Indigenous folks. And I want to mention this because we have seen that, for instance, efforts around Alabama, Amazon workers organizing has heavily been influenced by the Black Lives Matter movement. I mention this because, again, we know that about 85% of the workers in Alabama are Black and Brown. I think it's like over 50% are women. It's important to mention these numbers. Again, the impacts we're seeing in terms of job insecurity, unsafe working conditions is disproportionately impacting communities of color. And again, when you have if you want to align this to terms of racial inequities and so forth, we have to address these systematic problems in real ways that are influenced by us impacting law and policy in a real way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, this is a question from the audience, but from Joe Miller, what's the best way to collect emails from widely dispersed contract workers who don't know each other? And then I also kind of have something to add to it, which is, yeah, like, how do you kind of, like, all three of you are doing really great work, and like, I'm wondering, like, how do you go about kind of building solidarity across all of these different organizations doing this work? And maybe I'll go with you, Vanessa.
Sure. How to organize a remote atomized workforce. I have a little bit of experience with that. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, that's unfortunately been like the struggle, like the whole time I've been organizing is like, we don't have a shop floor. We don't have a break room. We don't even have a shared workplace necessarily. Right. We've always followed this thing called the 5-person rule, which is just what my fellow organizers and I, term it, which is basically to like any time that you encounter somebody, be it in a social media space or in person, reach out to them and just introduce yourself, right? Like part of why atomized workforces are harder to organize is because people just don't have that innate sort of like coworker relationship with one another, right? And so a lot of it's about like really like recreating that infrastructure in some sort of more likely than not digital way that also can be replicated in person in times of non-COVID, hopefully. But it's about like finding a way to share space and always be organizing. Like that's the other thing is that like you can't just like say, oh, okay, I'm going to go out and look for people for an hour today, and you're going to end up coming into contact with an Uber driver or an Instacart shopper or maybe even a freelance photographer. Like these are all like people that I've come across in just everyday conversations with folks that I have. So like you keep that kind of switch on in your mind. But what I would highly recommend is just sort of like figuring out a way to recreate some digital infrastructure for people to congregate into a community, and don't be too open about necessarily like what you're doing in that space. You still need to probably like get to know people a little bit better, because unfortunately, I know Chris can attest to this, like organizing spaces be sabotaged sometimes, right? Like it sucks. But keep the more nitty gritty details of what you guys are trying to do in a more private conversation space. But I mean, just figure out a way to bring people together into some sort of like, digital shop floor, right? And really like forge connections with people, because that's really what organizing is about, is figuring out how to build relationships, right? And how to improve on those relationships, and how to make those relationships solid enough that when you're going to walk out, the next person's going to walk out with you, and the next person's going to walk out with them, right? Hopefully that answered the full question. I don't remember if there was a second component to it or not, but yeah.
No, I think you got it. Yeah. Jessica, were you about to say something?
Yeah, if I may. I mean, I think it's a great question, and I think we're shifting into this new era of digital organizing, truly, in terms of really using our social media platforms in more creative ways to build commonality among workers and figure out what do we do, what are our common issues, and how do we like move forward with that. But I did want to use this time to send a quick invite to the audience. We do have what we're calling a Kosh Activate, which is basically a virtual space to learn a little bit more about how you can access some information around workers' rights, get to know other workers in your area that are mobilizing, maybe moving forward campaigns. I know I have my fellow co-director who's on the chat and maybe sending a link to the audience and inviting folks to that. But that's one very solid, concrete way of getting involved as a starting point, is to learn more about our network, and likewise for Vanessa and Chris.
Absolutely.
Chris, oh yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah, I just add yes. My short experience in organizing it's been quite a journey, but one thing for sure, you have to stay resilient. Stay true to your mission as an organizer and an activist. Whatever works for you and your team, continue to do that. Everybody's putting in work in their own ways. For example, what we did, the Congress of Essential Workers, we traveled the entire pandemic. We went to different parts of the country. We continue to do that. We put our lives at risk. Either way, we were unprotected at work. So why not do it for a good cause? So just continue to stay true to your mission, and that's it. Organize, talk, have these conversations with as many people as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are unfortunately running out of time, but I just wanted to thank all of you so much for joining us here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the
Thanks for
space.
having me.
Yeah, thank you for hosting, Megan.
Of course.